Welcome to another how-to video from bugspray.com. In this video, I'll be detailing how to properly use our sound repellers inside the home or outside the home. These units come with two main components, the remote control and a power supply. These units are designed to be used inside the home and outside the home. They are essentially weatherproof. They're certainly not waterproof. What I'll be doing here is going over how the unit functions, give you a brief idea of how you can go about making the proper setting. But keep in mind, on our product page where you're viewing this video, there should be a lot of details regarding the various settings for different animals. Simply put, there's too many to list or to go over in a video. What I can do is show you the 5 main switches and controls so that you'll be able to understand what they do. And then from there, if you review the product page, you'll be able to see how those different settings can be used to work for your target animal. So again, the unit comes with the remote control and a power supply. It's important to understand that these units can be powered by this little power supply, or they can be powered by batteries. In general, if you're using the units inside the home, the power supply is the way to go, because first, you can not have to worry about recharging or replacing batteries. Secondly, you can have the unit running continuously. And for many animals that are inside the home, places like an attic or a crawl space, running the unit continuously on the ultrasound setting is going to keep those areas pest free. This unit features an Audible Sound, and we'll get into that as we get the back panel open and I show you the controls. But before I do, it's important to understand that in general, these units are best employed after animals have been removed from an attic or crawl space. If they're in the yard and they're nesting in tunnels, you're probably going to have to trap them out. It is possible without ground stake repellers or these units, you can chase animals away from the yard. It's also possible if you have an animal occasionally visiting, say for a night or two, and then you don't hear them for weeks. If you place units like this in an attic or crawl space, they will be able to keep animals from coming back indefinitely, mostly because the animals won't like the sound, but more importantly, they're not nesting there. The structure is not their home, so they're not there every day. They don't have young that they're raising, and for that reason, the units can be effective in eradicating animals that are active in those spaces. So keep that in mind. If you have a problem that is pretty much locked in, meaning that you're seeing or hearing activity on a daily basis, you're probably going to have to go to our video training program, and that's listed under the R section in the animal articles that we have at bugspray.com. In that 3-phase video presentation, you can learn how to deal with the animals in or around the home, and the last part of that process is installing some of these units. But for the sake of this product presentation, we're going to focus on how this is going to be used just for keeping animals away after animals have been removed, or if you just want to make sure that you don't get them. There's a couple of things that you also should know about how ultrasound works. Ultrasound is very much like a flashlight. So in this position, the sound would be sent out in that direction. It's not going to go this way. And this is important. If you have an open area in the yard and you're deploying one of these in one direction, it will work great for that coverage. The angle is not quite 180 degrees. It's probably about 120 to 150 degrees. And in some cases, placing units back to back is necessary so that you can get full coverage. In an attic space, if you're able to place a unit in a corner of the attic, you can probably get the whole attic covered, because one unit, if it has line of sight, can cover 4,000 to 5,000 square feet. Attic spaces can be tricky, and there can be some dead zones, particularly true if you have a lot of storage up there or if you have tray ceilings. For those situations, animals hiding behind those tray ceilings can be kind of in a dead zone, so they won't be affected by the sound. And you may have to place units directly at that location to get them to stay out. Ultrasound does not hurt individuals like people, pets, and it doesn't even hurt the animals that are hearing it. It is annoying, and animals that are targeted with the really high frequency certainly do not like hearing this around the clock. Animals, say for example, bobcat or mink, predatory animals. These animals, when they hear the ultrasound going off from afar, they do not like it and they tend to stay away. Large animals like deer or elk or bear, woodchuck, you're better off using a combination of the ultrasound and the audible sound. So there are limits and there's certainly guidelines for each animal. And again, the product page will detail what the best setting might be for your particular animal based on where it's active, whether it's in the home or whether it's outside in the yard someplace. These power supplies, when used inside the house, are fine. If you want to take these outside and power them with the power supply, you still need to keep this protected. In other words, you don't run an extension cord out into the yard and then plug this into the extension cord. These are not weatherproof. So keep this well protected in a garage or inside the home, and then run the power cord out to the unit. We have extensions. These power cords can be purchased in 33-foot lengths and 66-foot lengths, and they hook up in very simple connections here, male-female, so that you can add to this as many as you need and reach out as far as you have to go. We have some customers using these several hundred feet away from the power supply and running the cord, simply attaching them in series ultimately to the back of the unit. At this point, let's get to the back of the unit and see what it looks like. The first thing you'll notice is that it has two little holes here. These are designed for hanging it on, say, a fence or a tree. We do offer a mounting block, which is very convenient. The mounting block features a little half-inch hole that you can slide over a stake. And then, of course, the unit has two holes. There's two screws on the back of the mounting block, and they fit into the holes on the back of the unit. And then once they're slid on, it's nice and secure so that you can set this unit over a stake and place it in the ground, and it will be off of the ground and pointing in the direction that you want. So the mounting block is something that's handy for many applications. It's not required if you're using it inside the house or, like, for example, an attic or a crawl space. Simply setting this on the ground can work, or placing it on a small box or brick or something is almost always adequate as well. Again, line of sight, so we want this basically pointing in the direction that you want to repel the animals from. On the front panel, before I get to the back, there is this LED light, and that will function when it's dark out. So whether it's dark outside or in the attic space, when the unit goes off, that little LED will flash. The motion sensor here will turn red when it picks up motion, and of course the sound comes out of the speaker. To take the back panel off is very simple. The cover is like a Tupperware cover. It's a soft, pliable kind of plastic, and once open you can see that the compartment has a series of slider switches, two small dial switches, and then one main frequency control dial. So the frequency control dial has various settings, and again, the target animal will be listed on the product page with the proper setting for that animal. In this case, we're going to not really talk much about this, except that you just dial it in for your animal, and once that's in place, you can focus more on these. Before we get to those, let's look here. We have the compartment for batteries. They basically will fit 4 C batteries, and when used out in the yard, these batteries can get you 3 to 5 months of activity, or power, I should say. The batteries don't or can't run the unit continuously, so if you plan on using it continuously out in the yard, you have to use the power supply. If you decide that you are going to rely on motion detection, the unit running on batteries will be fine. Now, getting back to the slider switches and these two little dial switches, what we have up top is a very simple slider switch, which has a 24-hour setting, a daytime only, and a nighttime only setting. So what we need to do is make a decision. Do we want the unit on all the time? Do we want it on only at day or only at night? If we're dealing with noises in the attic, we're probably going to start with it being on 24 hours a day. If we're dealing with, say, deer in the yard, we tend to focus on nighttime activity, so maybe we'll have it set to nighttime only. This is an important part of the setup. If you're going to have it on 24 hours a day and you're using it in the yard, then remember it can go off at any time. This is important. The second slider switch will tell you whether or not the unit will be constantly on or if it's relying on motion detection. So when we slide it all the way over to this side, it's set on motion detection, and that means that the little sensor up front, once it senses activity, the unit will go on. When it senses activity, this will turn red and the unit will propel the sound. Generally, it's always ultrasound, and of course if it's at night, the LED bar will go off as well. If you have the audible sound turned up, when the unit goes off, you will be able to hear it. The audible sound is variable from 0 to 100 decibels. And if you're using the unit inside the house, it's almost always not needed. So for attics and crawl spaces, audible sound is generally not going to be dialed up. You're going to rely primarily on just the ultrasound setting. Going back to the slider switch, if you have it on constantly on, and you have this set to 24 hours, that would be the two most common settings that we use, particularly for use inside the home. You would then dial the audible sound all the way to 0. So this way you're not going to hear the unit. It's only going to be setting off or releasing ultrasounds. This last dial switch is for motion detection sensitivity. And when used in the yard, for example, on deer or rabbit, you can control how sensitive this sensor is. It has a range listed of 0 to 30 feet, but it can detect motion out 40 to almost 50 feet. You can dial this way down so that you can basically lure animals into, say, a small little patch of flowers or something that they've been chewing on. And then once they get within 5 or 10 feet, the unit will kick on. And of course, you'll be able to really give the animal a scare so that they won't want to come back. That's a really good way to use it when you have small areas that you want to protect. If you're looking for broad coverage over 4,000 or 5,000 square feet, dialing it all the way up to 30 feet would make most sense. Again, as far as the audible sound, if you're using it on motion detection and you're relying on batteries and you're trying to repel something like wild pigs or elk or bear, and you have a wide open area, you can set the motion detector all the way to its highest setting, and then once the unit senses any animal, it will go off. The 20 to 40 decibel dial setting is pretty high and in general good enough for any neighborhood environment. But if you're in a rural area and there's not a lot of neighbors around, you can dial it up to 80 or even 100, and you'll get that much more of an impact when the animals hear it. This is particularly helpful if you have something like burrowing hogs, where they like to root up the yard, or something that's another large animal, like say a fox or a coyote. Anything that's large, the louder the sound, the better. As far as the settings go when the unit is activated, I'm going to demonstrate that now so that you can get an idea of how it looks and how it should feel when the unit gets turned on. I have a power supply ready to go on this, and I'm going to put this to 24 hours. I'm going to set this to constant, and I'm going to plug it in. Basically, the power supply will go to in this little port here, and then once that gets power, it's going to give you a little red indicator here as it powers up and goes through its normal cycling. Now once it's done that, it will then begin to release the ultrasound. The slider switch is set to constant, so that means that once this goes on, there will be a constant sound. I'm not quite sure. Okay, I've dialed down the audible, so the audible is not heard right now, but it is going off. The camera probably is not picking up the ultrasound, but if I dial up the audible, you can begin to hear it. And it can get quite loud. So I will not turn it up because it is annoying. Now, why are you seeing flashing lights? Because the light is on here in this room. Well, the LED will go off inside a house that only has standard iridescent lights or even LED lights, because the photosensor is really only sensitive to UV light. And if used outside, it will sense the sunlight. So if you're powering these units during the day, this bar will not go off. But once it gets dark, it will go off. In the attic, having that strobe effect is actually pretty helpful. So at this point, the unit is always on, and it's going to continuously run. Let's go ahead and turn the power off. And now we're going to turn this to motion sensing and then turn it back on. And what you'll see here is a little different, because the unit will turn on, but if I keep it in this position, it won't sense me. I'm also going to double check real quick on the sensor. Okay, so that's good. It's set to about 10 or 15 feet, so I'll easily be able to activate it. Now again, the unit does take a little bit of time to circle or cycle through its initial setup. And at this point, it's done that pretty much. So it's going to shut itself down, and it's going to be in ready mode in a little bit here. Before I get into setting it off, I want to mention that that slider switch for the motion detector also has the constant setting on the middle, but to the far side is what we call constant sweep, and that's where it's constantly going off, but it's also constantly rotating the sounds that it's releasing. In some cases, that's a good setting to have, again, in an attic space or a crawl space where there's no people and there's potential for small animals that can be active all day long. Once this unit shuts down, it's been activated, like I said, after I turned it on, we'll be able to show you what it can do with the remote control. And the remote control has a few features. The red button that you see here is what we call an alarm, and if you hit that, the unit will make this kind of activation that's basically whatever you have it set at for the max. And this could be used even if the unit is set for, say, daytime only and it's nighttime out and you saw an animal and you wanted to scare it. You could do so by hitting that red button. So it overrides whatever the settings are, and that can be handy, particularly if you have something that you see in the yard, or if you're hearing something up in the attic and it's not going off, you can remotely turn it on and have some type of an impact on that animal, even though the unit is set not to go off. The next button that we have here is what's called standby. It's on the right side. And if we hit that, the standby button turns the unit into basically a standby mode. Standby mode means that it's not going to go off. And let's say that you wanted to go out in the yard and walk your pet, or just walk around in the yard and not have the unit going off. That button will deactivate it. It's still on technically, and if you were to watch the front of the unit, you would be able to see that little red light in the motion sensor go off periodically, and that's just a reminder to let you know that, hey, the unit is not officially on. It's still powered, and it needs to be taken out of standby mode with the remote control. So the unit will basically just be in a shutdown mode that allows you to go about your business in the yard without setting them off. And again, this can be helpful in the evening hours if you're walking a pet, or if you're just going outside to do some gardening or yard work, or if you're just wanting to hang around in a section of the yard where these units are placed and you don't want them continuously going off. So right now, we're going to take it out of standby mode. Hit that again, and the unit's ready to go. So it picked up on my motion, and sure enough, it kicked on. It has a couple of other buttons down here. One is for just the ultrasound setting, and if you use this, you can activate it and it will set off nothing but ultrasound. If you hit this button to the right, it will set it off to do nothing but strobe. And that could be handy, again, if you for some reason had a sense that if you use a strobe it might scare an animal. This could be something in an attic, it could be something in the yard as well at night. Strobe is very effective on birds at night, and it's certainly really good against bats and flying squirrels, several small animals. So the remote control is handy. It's not how you generally use the unit, and the standby mode is probably the best feature of the remote control because it allows you to just turn the unit off and on without actually turning it off and on. So at this point, I'm going to just show you how to close the back unit. Take the power cord and just fit it through that little slot. The plastic Tupperware type cover, to properly affix it, some people struggle with that. It is very much pliable enough to where it can be bent, but the secret to putting it on is to push down the sides as you're pushing the unit on. And if you push the sides in a little bit, you'll see that it easily goes over all the edges. And this is how you get a secure fit. So at this point it's properly secured and the unit can be deployed outside without letting water get into it. If water did get into it, that bottom hole here will allow it to drain out. We do suggest that you keep this off the ground at least 6 inches, and for different animals as high as 3 or 4 feet. Again, this is all detailed in the product page animal settings section, and there's a whole other list of information there as well. So reading that page, strongly suggested. You'll see that we have all the options listed there as well, including the optional mounting blocks, power supplies, the 33-foot extension cord, the 66-foot extension cord, and we also have some battery power options for running it off of a deep cycle 12-volt battery, as well as a cigarette lighter outlet that you have in a car. You can power these off of that as well. Regarding the power, I want to point out that these units draw very little power, approximately 2 watts or less. So even if you're running them continuously all month, the consumption will be very minimal and not much on the power bill. So thank you for watching this how-to video from bugspray.com.